Welcome, everyone, to the very first session of Generation Analog 2025. The title of the session is Punk, Politics, and Power, and we have an all-star lineup of international presenters who are bringing us a series of papers on this topic. Because we have four papers, 15 minutes each to knock out, we want to leave some question and answer time. Of course, you can always jump in the Discord to address that. We will begin right now. So I will go ahead and invite our initial presenters, Zoheb and Anneliese, to share their screens. Up there they are already, and I invite them to take it away.
Right. Thanks, Evan. Hi, everyone. I'm Zoheb. I'm based at the UiT, the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. And I am working on a postdoc dealing with the games as ecological objects, more or less, themes and also the materiality of them. And I created this presentation as for discussion with my colleague, Annie Furlong-Muir, who is a part-time game designer and a full-time biomedical student studying blood cancer, which is why they couldn't be here with us today. They're in the lab. But our topic today is about eco-revolution in TTRPGs and how themes of ecology and revolution can be united within games. This kind of like a open inquiry that we're doing, kind of like based on certain themes that we have seen as trends within games, and to see if we can kind of like figure out certain ways, certain trends, certain things forward. So in that spirit of inquiry, let's begin with an overview. Right. So this is contextualized by the ecological turn that Chloe Germain identified as taking place within game studies and games as a whole. Like eco games are being created more and more. And the scholarship of games largely focuses on digital games, digital eco games. But at the same time, TTRPGs have lower ecological costs, which would make them, I think, better objects for study as eco games compared to digital games. And whether or not consciously responding to that or not, there is also at the same time a sort of increasing trend towards TTRPGs that are being designed, self-describing as ecological. And we are looking at these games through the idea of the need for revolutionary ecological politics that are needed at this moment in a time of climate crisis. And what we have noticed are two trends. First is that this trend towards tabletop role-playing games, eco games, they lack a political dimension. They lack engagement in politics. But at the same time, there is also a trend towards creating games that deal with revolution. And these games, however, lack an ecological dimension. So for us, the question that we're going to kind of explore through presenting these two trends is to kind of like open the question of like what an eco-revolutionary game would look like. What would it look like to bring revolution and ecology together? So we talked about eco games. What is an eco game? Now, people use this term, but as far as I can tell, as far as we can tell, there is no actual definition on what it is. So what we're using as our purpose is a game that's centering on ecological themes, broadly speaking. So ecological themes, they include our ideas is that it would be that nature would be at the foreground, not at the background. That the games would be about exploration and exploration of the world, of the natural world, and that there would be incentives, both mechanical and fictional, for players to interact with nature. And that the games would put forward as intentional intentional visions of relationships, so not accidental or subtextual, intentional visions of relation between nature and society. And that the imaginary worlds and ecosystems within these games would stand in for the real world in some capacity. So the trend towards eco games, we kind of created this like little survey of various games that you can find on itch.io and other places. We searched with ecology to see what we can find, and you can see that it kind of run the gamut. There's full games here. There's modules for other games. There's world building games here. There's dungeon delving and so on. We're going to be looking at three games as case studies to kind of like look at what these games are saying about ecology and also how they're representing politics, which is our area of interest here. So these games are Mappa Mundi, Cloud Empress, and the Wild Sea. So briefly, Mappa Mundi. It came out this year from Three Sail Studios. It's set in a world after a mysterious ecological disaster, and the players play as explorers and academics who catalog the world and its various monsters. The the kind of like USP of this game, the selling point of the game, is that the monsters are to be studied, not to be fought, and that the game also has unique mechanics for engaging with the terrain. There's like a card-based system for generating dynamic terrain in the world. And as a Kickstarter goal, it also came out with recycled paper. That was one of the things that they put forward. So that's the ecological dimension, but the sort of like political assumptions that the game makes, it kind of is avoidant of addressing them. And one of these is that there is a hierarchy of life that exists within the world. So there are monsters that are more important than creatures. So a monster would be like a phoenix, a creature would be like a crow, just to get you an idea of what they mean by that. And they don't interrogate this. They have a naive understanding of the history of exploration and ecology within European empire building that's unaddressed. Cloud Empress, the next one, came out 2 years ago. It was designed by Watt. It's an OSR game, a mothership hack. And it's also set after a disaster, but this one is created by an evil civilization that then left for the stars. And despite being an OSR game, it has principles of treating the world as a space for other than plunder and violence. The game involves imago, who are giant cicadas. They're the dominant sea species around which humanity has to live around their life cycles. And there's a pollutant called chalk that magicians have to use, and it's harvested from the imago. The political, however, the world does not change or transform. It's kind of in a static state. And the game has this discourse that treats human endeavor with suspicion and all human desires as potentially destructive to the environment. And even though it has this anti-violence sort of like rhetoric, it has several pages of rules for violence and weapons, typical of OSR. The Wild Sea is another example. This was by MythWorks in 2022. It's in the Wild Word system. It's unlike the other two games. It does not self-describe as an ecological game. However, it also takes place in an ecological apocalypse. That a world has been covered with trees, and the players are positioned in ecology through their characters. The various bloodlines are engaged within the world's ecology. So you can be humans, cactoids, centipede fungi, spiderfolk, but even the humans are not normal humans. They've been altered by the ecology of the wild sea. And it calls the GM a firefly. So bringing the ecology forward into the GM's mindset as well. Play involves navigating the wild sea and encountering its community's flora and fauna. And the player's ship damages the environment as it passes. And the recent expansion has added further depth to ecosystems to kind of like so the ecological bend is very clear there. And politically, the interesting thing is that the human nature relationship, you see it damages the place. It's dynamic and ambivalent, but at the same time, there's still no explicit political lens within the game. It's kind of subtextual. And this brings us to the True Revolution games where the politics come in. So for us, a revolution game is a game that's calling for societal change with themes of violent struggle and oppression by the marginalized. And the analysis of this marginalization is intersectional. So themes of class conflict, anti-colonial themes, queer liberation, etc., come into this. And it's a game that would have incentives for players, incentives both mechanical and fictional, for players to feel and respond to oppression. And in the imaginary worlds would model real-world oppression. And there's a subtrend within these games of having guidelines towards real-world organization and resistance. So here's our overview of various revolution games that we know of and also could discover through itch.io and Drive2RPG. So we see once again that it kind of like it spans the gamut. There's like dedicated games, there's like modules, and also various genres. The three games that we're going to be primarily looking at as our case studies here are Blades in the Dark, Spire, The City Must Fall, and Mad as Hell. So Blades in the Dark is the oldest game on our list. So it's created by Evil Hat in 2017. It's the seminal Force in the Dark game. And it takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting, which is a theme. And players are within an oppressive empire. And players have to play as criminal gangs. However, despite this origin of criminal gangs, the play culture and developer interest seems to be shifting more and more towards the political. And there are Players are more likely to be playing as revolutionaries, unionists, anti-colonialists, etc. And the ecological themes creep in through the setting being based on a magic fuel that is harvested from demonic whales. And this magical ecological collapse, that the shattering of the world that is kind of like in the backdrop of the world. But at the same time, despite these ecological themes, players are largely, that's more in the backdrop. Players are largely going to be focused on human concerns. Yeah. Spire was a similar sort of game by Rowan, Rook, and Deckard from 2018. Also created the Sparked by Resistance system. It's about Aelfir, who have conquered the Drow city of Spire, and players play as Drow resistance operatives. And it's anti-colonial and intersectional in its approach towards this class, towards the struggle. So themes of class, race, gender oppression are kind of key. And ecology comes in through a very detailed setting within the book, which hints at ecology. So there's a druidic faction, for example, that you could ally with or fight as enemies. There's a one of the elements is that the Aelfir have drilled into the magical base of Spire to create a subway system, which Annie pointed out matched up timeline-wise to the debate of fracking at the time in the UK, Rowan, Rook, and Deckard being a British game. And Aelfir are shown as being reshaping and killing the natural world and having no real eye for nature, for natural beauty. But at the same time, despite all these ecological hints, it is still largely as an accent or subtext to the world. It's not the main thing that you should be engaging with in your resistance. And then we come to the most recent example that we have, Mad as Hell. But Soul Muppet, the quick start came out this year by Soul Muppet. Yes, and it is in fact unfinished yet, but it's still interesting to kind of like see what they are kind of like emphasizing within at the moment. So it's currently as a quick start, fully funded at the moment in Kickstarter, and it's about radicals who are fighting for their communities. They're fighting against literal monsters and demons created by capitalism. And environmentalism comes in. For example, one of the quick start character examples is an environmental activist that you could play as. But at the same time, it's largely about social harms, right? Ecology is briefly there. For example, climate change is mentioned, but as an example of a reason to fight against capitalism. So it's still within the context of societal oppressions and so on. So we have these 3 games on Revolution so far, where we see political engagement, the need to transform society, but with ecology as kind of like in the backdrop or as an accent. Just as we saw with the ecological games, the great engagement to various degrees with ecology itself and the human nature relationship. But at the same time, there's little to no active engagement with politics. And oftentimes the political assumptions are kind of like not addressed. So how do we kind of like square the circle? How do we have these 2 trends? What could an eco-revolutionary game, if we could imagine them to be? Not that there aren't none at the moment, but if we were to imagine this label applying to games, what would that look like? So this is where kind of like the open call comes in, where we're kind of like thinking out loud of what this label could mean. So what we suggest is that eco-revolutionary games would be about changing society for the betterment of humans and nature. And they would not see humans as apart from the natural world, but put humans as part of the natural world. And would approach this through intersectional perspectives. So indigenous perspectives, decolonist perspectives, taking inspiration from disability studies, script theory, aka script theory, and other, and basically, well, as intersectional as possible. And it would directly address the politics underlying climate change and extractivism. And within this sort of like four points that we were thinking, there's also a question to consider, which is relevant given the games that we've seen, which is, should eco-revolutionary games avoid post-apocalyptic settings? Is the idea of a post-apocalypse anti-hope that the world has already ended? Because we've seen that this is something that keeps recurring both in revolution games and in eco games. And is this inherently a flaw? It's something we don't really know, but something to consider, I think. And as we consider this question, to end on a bright note, we also want to point towards certain steps towards an eco-revolutionary game that are taken. So we already talked about Blades in the Dark as not really addressing ecology, but they're currently working on a supplement to expand the setting to the Dagger Isles, one of the locations within it. And this has a much more ecological and explicitly revolutionary perspective, bringing it together. And we also have been looking at Ecomorphos by David Blandy, which involves, it is post-apocalyptic, but it is about eco-punks kind of like exploring the ruins of the world and trying to find their place within it. So it's ecological and it's punk together. And 10 seconds to go according to my timer, so I'll stop it right there. And I'm open to questions afterwards.
Thank you, Zoheb, and again a warm round of digital applause for not only staying in time but delivering a fascinating talk with a number of different dimensions for us to consider. And I'm going to move right along to our next talk. Again, you can already dive into the Discord with questions and comments on that talk, but officially we are moving to a talk called the TREEgame, designing a Phyto-Punk game with 4 presenters, but we'll see how they divide up that labor. Margarete Jahrmann, Stefan Glasauer, Thomas Brandstetter, and Max Moswitzer. So whoever wants to take it away, you are welcome to do so.
Hello, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to start. Is the sharing working?
Ja, es funktioniert, aber du solltest noch auf diesen Fullscreen, dass die Präsentation. Okay.
There we go.
Perfectly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thanks for the invitation. I'm keeping it very short. I'll just start with introducing us. Only 2 of us are speaking. Margarete Jahrmann, who is the head of Experimental Game Cultures Department at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. And myself, I will also present. I'm a lecturer at the department and also a researcher. In our group, there's also Stefan Glasauer, who is a professor of applied neurosciences at Cottbus University in Germany, and Max Moswitzer, who is also a lecturer and a teacher at the Department of Experimental Game Cultures. We developed this game together, a collaborative, and we will talk about the design process and the thoughts behind it, and hope that this will provide some discussion for the topic. I give first to Margarete to say some general remarks about her method, and then I'll talk about the game in specific.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, and thanks for having us here. Also, our group is mixed of scientists, researchers in game studies and fields, analog developers, and punks. Max is a punk, for example, or was with 17 and still is. Our approach was that we work with a method that involves play as an approach towards science and research, but mainly also to creating. Experimental Game Cultures in Vienna is a new department which focuses on the practice. So we develop games and not under the premises of design. So maybe we are one of these approaches where you have experiments in the focus, as it is in the title, but we follow an approach where we can play with games as material for arts and make artistic games. And so this was our way that we also came to these questions that are our actual challenges or global challenges, which is climate change, of course, and also how this is one of our missions more in general as experimental game cultures. What is the gesellschaftliche Wirkmacht? What is the agency and effect or impact that we can have directly to society with our artifacts? And so with this artistic exploratory ludic method that we were describing, we work together, not a coincidence, also with a neuroscientist, with cognitive psychology, with behavioral psychologists in our research group. And so this is the basic. The psycholudic approach puts the psychological dimension together with play as the core experience design. So we can go to the next. This is the ludic method in short. Also play as method, games as metaphor for our approach to life. So how do we play? That is our question, and how everybody knows the principles of gain, conquer, win, collect. Also, why is it like that? Is this really a human condition? That's what we ask the neuroscientists and the psychologists. Or is it a cultural condition purely or merely? So how can we change it? Can playing be fun without these strategies? What other motivations do we have? As artists, we know that we can achieve flow in other things. As coders, programmers, we know. So how can, and in games we have flow, but is it only because of these game mechanics that we know? And we even don't see any others. So where is change and how can we change that? No, it's
to-
okay. I speak quicker, the quicker you move. Core principles are
Okay, this
for
is my part now because
asymmetrical gameplay.
yeah,
Please.
these are the core principles of our game. So what we decided to make a game, an experimental game that sort of challenged all those mechanics and ways of playing we know from Euro games and from all kinds of games. So the first principle of our game, of the TREEgame, is an asymmetrical gameplay. This is, of course, influenced by diverse games at the moment, which use asymmetrical player positions and roles. With us, it's mechanics as well as victory conditions, and as we will see, even the type of game that is played is asymmetrical. And the second core principle, which was great fun to develop, is actually the change of roles. So this is also, I mean, a lot of what we did is inspired by people like Avery Alder or Emma Bell Holland and their thoughts about innovative game mechanics. And change of roles is one of the things Margarete and Stefan also experimented with. We did some experiments. Of course, it's an old principle, like in the game of tag. You have a change of roles all the time. If you're caught, you are the catcher, and then the role again changes. But I think it's rarely seen in modern contemporary board games or role-playing games. We experimented with different conventional board games. What would happen if we changed the player positions or player roles during the game? This was quite interesting, more interesting than we would thought. We had a random principle where we would just change our positions. And yeah, Margarete, you want to say something about this? Or?
Yeah. It was more also a question, how is this experience? Is a game ruined if we play it transformative? I was very inspired also, who is allowed to play how? What does it mean if you don't stick to the rules and immediately in Catan change the role? Is there still a play motivation, and how did this feel? And we tried out several board games, card games, etc., and we still could play it. So that was our research meetings, was quite fun at the university. Weekly we played a game with these rules where we had a constant change of role. We took care what happened then, but not only once or once, in each round by throwing a dice. And so we took care of each other's roles, was an effect. Playing was still fun. It was a bit weird because we had one interesting feedback. The end at Catan, very strategical and colonial game, the winner said, "Oh, winning didn't feel like winning. I didn't earn this win. So why do you want to win at all?" Go on.
Yeah, and in our game, we decided to implement these principles in a more systematic way. So how does it work? And I will give you a very short overview of the game. This is a graphic, but this is more.
But let's give me the overview first also. It shows a little bit, if I saw a few words, this overview, it was caused by a conversation, under a cherry blossom tree. Yeah? What would happen if we play a tree? That was the background. Is this a role that we can play at all without anthropomorphization? And therefore you see the drawings in the game map also. If you are having different roles, two of them are agency roles and others are agency roles, but not in our sense. And this is what Thomas is now going to explain in detail.
Yeah, I will make it short. So we have 4 player positions: industrialist and citizen, which are very classical, and lake and wood. There is a blank sheet of paper in the middle where we draw an outline of a woods and a lake. The citizen plays a really classical game of set collection. So they have wish list cards. They have to collect stuff, which is symbolized by playing cards, and they can take it from the game board, or they can take it from the industrialist. And they get points for collecting their sets, and then they can win basically. The industrialist gets victory points through revenue. They have this sliding scale. I was playing a lot of Land and Freedom at the time. There's a sliding scale where they can change investment level, which will produce revenue for them, and they will produce playing cards, which the citizen can then shop and get stuff. So they will also play a very classical board game, collecting stuff. One interesting thing is that investment creates pollution, which will go into the fields of the wood and the lake, and which will influence them because they have no real agency in the sense of the other players, strategic agency. They will roll on the table to see how much pollution they can remove. And depending on how much pollution there's left, they either draw something or they have to delete the drawing. So they play a drawing game, which goes back, of course, to surrealist practices of Cadavre Exquisite and other kind of drawing games. The idea was to play a really very, very different game from the other games. Both of them have no victory conditions, so there is nothing that says you have won. I mean, maybe they have lost if everything is destroyed, but they have no real victory. And of course, the second thing is the roles change. So each turn we roll a dice, and if there's a 1, player roles are changed, and you play a different role. So yeah, this is a video of how it looked in our game sessions.
Play testing sessions, we have to say.
Sessions, exactly. And it's really fun to just get up and take another role. It completely changes your perspective on the whole table, or you realize how much your perspective on a game is usually glued to your seat, and so on. So this was quite fun. Yeah, exactly. This is I'm keeping it short if it's okay for you, Margarete, or do you want to say something?
No.
Yeah, the question is, can you adopt a different perspective if you play a lake or play a tree? And what does it even mean to play a lake or play a tree? And I mean, there are many games, ecological games out there where you can play natural forces or whatever, like Spirit Island or whatever. But we didn't want to just have a guy in a rubber mask playing the lake or the tree, just having a similar kind of strategic agency, player decision, and so on to any other games, resource management, but just to have something very, very different. So the drawing and the rolling dice. Yeah, and I give
relevant for the role change is relevant for real life democracy, as we want to experience that beyond anthropomorphization. I cannot feel like a tree, and even not like you, but and so we point to this, that elections need to be more often, or maybe even based on throwing a dice. You can go on. Playing is acting, trees react. Free will, no choice. But is our free will also a speculation? Maybe here in the dark patterns, in this casino, we also have no free will. We give it away, but we, next one, reuse this game mechanic like it was in Monopoly. We change it. Das Glücksspiel, the chance is positive. The dark patterns of game design, of gambling, become positive for role change. Win is war, conquer, critic. Next one. Next one. Multi-perspectivity instead of abstraction. That was our outcome with electroencephalograms where we measured players' activity. Next one.
Yes.
You say.
Yeah, and this was also something that was important for us, and this is also where the punk comes in, the do-it-yourself game aesthetic. So we published a booklet with rules. We didn't want to make some sort of big box stuff, but we wanted something that you can just use components.
On the next screen, I think we have an image.
Yeah. This is the image of the booklet.
At next screen, we have of the exhibition, the cards you can use, your existing playing cards. And here you see The different kind of agency is expressed with drawing. And during our exhibition last month, the last 10 weeks, we showed it 8 weeks in Vienna, sorry. And this is what all the audience was, but all the players during the exhibition, a public experiment, were drawing. DIY is punk aesthetics. Don't buy any board game case. Just buy or get the write down yourself the rules and draw your own game board and reuse everything you have at home. I think we are done, or? Yes.
Yeah. This is just our what we already wrote in the call for papers thing. We wanted to throw a spanner into the frictionless clockwork of game mechanics and reject the consumerist aesthetics of perfectly designed box and components. So our idea was to bring something of the energy of punk into the world of analog games and to experiment with really very different ways of playing and approaching game mechanics.
We are in time even, or?
You are
Even.
totally in time, and I appreciate what you've accomplished here in under 15 minutes. So again, thanks so much for these sort of torrent of thoughts and design ideas and a whole paradigm that we can consider. So this is exactly what we
have already. Thank
exactly. Thank you so much. I'm going to call our next presenters. Our next presenter would be Valerio, talking about the omission of legal accountability in war games. Valerio, it's on you.
Hi everyone. Well, first let me share my screen here. Is it working? Yes, I think so. So first things first, I'm Valerio Moccia. I'm a postdoc student, postdoc researcher from Catholic University in Milan. And there I'm studying basically gender studies related to game studies and at the same time cinema workplaces. So my presentation today will be about the missing rules and the omission of accountability in war games. By approaching the question of representation in analog wargaming, one usually can be struck by the richness of details that those games present, particularly researched historical scenarios, carefully balanced mechanics, artistic precision of the components, but perhaps what is most revealing is what is not on the table, what is not in the ludic space. This research stems from a critical inquiry into a systematic omission that characterize contemporary war games, especially miniature tabletop war games, and how those omissions shape particular understandings of warfare through a process of deliberate exclusion. What becomes apparent is that these games often form a form of war without consequences, ludic environments in which most fundamental dimension of human conflicts has been systematically removed. What remains are basically mechanical systems that simulate logistic tactics of warfare, but at the same time, they sidestep existential, ethical, and political realities. This process of extraction is so pervasive across the medium that it must be understood not as an accidental omission, but as intentional cultural labor, a crafting of specific frameworks for interpreting violence, authority, and political agency. It in a way reflects a broader design philosophy that regards war from a complex human catastrophe into something that is more palatable, controllable, abstract, an hyper-realistic logic in which warfare reflects a desire to disarm and neutralize, but not to kill. To understand how this sanitization project operates, we must now examine how contemporary miniature war games construct their vision of conflicts. What emerges is a pattern of exclusion, some absences, 6 absences, that shapes the ludic space as much as what is present. As Hammond and Potch note, they note that of digital war games, actually, most mainstream war games employ a series of filters that preludes access to deeply problematic yet salient aspects of war. And this is a dynamic that analog war games likewise produce. The first and most striking absence is the absence of the bodies. I mean, not only living bodies, but the physical reality of death. When units are eliminated, they vanish from the board. They are signified by flipping counters, removal of miniatures to an off-board pool, but there are no corpses. There is no visual or narrative trace of the violent acts, no recognition that warfare produces dismember. I'm sorry for the terms, but this is the reality, decomposing bodies. This game is depicted a war where death occurs in a way without dying, an elimination without elimination. The central fact of warfare, the production, the systematic production of corpses is rendered literally unseeable in favor of a clean war. Closely related to the absence of civilians, whose presence, closely related to that, there is the absence of civilians. Civilians whose presence usually fundamentally shapes the context of conflicts. Even in scenarios of urban combat, urban occupation, civilians are routinely excluded. Also, civilian function. Military units move through terrain that are stripped of habitation and that are reduced to tactical abstraction. By removing civilians, games bypass the ethical and political complexities of their presence and what the consequences of the action that could be made on them would raise on the players. And basically, they construct a distorted vision of what a conflict is. Equally significant is the absence of trauma. War generates not only casualties, but long-lasting psychological wounds, PTSD, survival guilt, moral injury. Those are almost entirely absent from game systems focused only on immediate tactical outcomes. Soldiers are portrayed not as vulnerable humans, but as usually abstract units, untouched by emotional toll of combat, apart from the toll that they actually accumulate during the single battle. This erasure extends also to collective trauma. War reshapes usually societies, fractured communities, scars, cultural memory. But none of these register in games that ends usually just with military objectives. Then we have the absence of law. It refers to the exclusion of legal frameworks, for example, the Geneva Convention, that usually govern on conflict. Players may commit actions that are equivalent to war crime without usually any mechanical consequence. This ludic environment suspends usual accountability, presenting warfare as something that is unconstrained. This omission is especially troubling in games that are used for military training, where it risks normalizing lawless approaches to conflict. Rather than neutral, this absence functions ideologically, constructing a deregulated vision of warfare that detaches violence from real-world legal obligation. Then we have the absence of ethics and morality. And this is subtler in a way, but equally pervasive. Player decisions are governed by abstract metrics, like victory points, valuation systems that are detached from ethical dilemmas in real warfare. Violation of humanitarian law, for example, torture, think of the Valkyrie in Warhammer 40k, civilian massacres, sexual violence, are excluded, not for historical reason, but to avoid confronting players with the moral question. Instead, games focus on playable elements, like tactics, equipment, resource management. As Kankan and Kahinko note, the results is usually a view of warfare as a clinical, rational decision-making void of ethical complexities. Morality here is not irrelevant, it's worse, it's erased before it can even emerge. And finally, we have the absence of consequences, the systematic exclusion of warfare's broader social, political, and economical aftermath. Most war games end with the achievement, as I said, of immediate military objective, but it neglects this reaction neglects the long-term realities such as reconstruction, such as cycle of revenge, economic collapse, political instability. War is usually framed as self-contained episode rather than part of an historical continuum with lasting repercussion. This logic is evident in major war games. Think of Warhammer 40k. in which planetary scale wars unfold in apocalyptic settings, but yet the gameplay usually focuses solely on tactical outcomes, unit elimination, objective points. Genocide of population, the ecological collapse of the planets, and the survival trauma are absent from the mechanics of the game, sometimes present in the narrative, but in a minor and adulterated way. Think of Bolt Action. Bolt Action simulates World War II. It offers an especially sanitized portrayal of World War II, despite evoking one of the war that was marked by most civilian massacres, most systematic atrocities. The gameplay of Bolt Action reduced this war to tactical skirmishes where German and Allied units are treated with the same mechanical neutrality. Even Field of Glory, which emphasizes historical accuracy, abstract ancient warfare into some form of algorithms, and there is obviously the problem with algorithmic counter, omits a lot of realities such as enslavement, such as rape, such as resource destruction. This temporal reduction obscures how war often generates new, persistent problems rather than resolving existing one. The absence of consequences thus perform ideological work, framing war as clean, effective, and ultimately manageable tool for political action, for achieve political objective. This pattern of exclusion in contemporary war games are not neutral choices, but expression of broader cultural logic. Through what Bogos called procedural rhetoric, this game constructs implicit arguments about how war works and what merits attention. The sanitization of conflicts serves commercial imperatives, making games marketable and enjoyable without invoking the discomfort of poor moral or human cost. The result is a designed ambivalence, where games are both militarily engaging and widely acceptable. Yet all those commercial motives alone don't fully account for the absence of legal, ethical, and long-term consequences. These omissions perform deeper ideological work, shaping how players understand violence, authority, and political agency. This results in a form of mnemonic hegemony, in which historical war games help construct a collective memory, often reinforcing heroic narratives while excluding critical perspectives. These also generate a state of hyper-real warfare, a new sanitized version of conflicts that appears clean and rational and stripped of suffering. Through largely conscious consensus among designers, among players, war becomes a sort of ideal object structured by the commercial logic of wargaming in a capitalist culture. But despite the pervasiveness and sanitization of war games, analog games usually offer structural possibilities for resistance. Unlike digital games, where rule systems are typically opaque, tabletop games are marked by a radical transparency. For example, their mechanics are visible, they are discussable, they are modifiable. This quality enables what Hearst calls deconstructive play, an engagement that critically interrogates the assumption embedded in game design. And some designers actually have begun to explore this potential through what can be called critical wargaming, games that deliberately foreground the ethical, legal, and human costs typically excluded from mainstream representation. Think of the GMT Coin series, as noted by Alonge. It incorporates morally troubling aspects like counterinsurgency, including violence against civilians, political complexities, but at the same time, it confronts players with elements that are usually omitted. Also, at the margin of the analog space, entire gaming communities have emerged that reject the militaristic paradigms altogether. The non-combat tabletop movement exemplifies this trend, offering two collections of games that focus on cooperation, care, and community problem-solving. Inspired by a punk aesthetic, these games subvert conventional wargaming logic by centering non-violent action. This design demonstrates the engaging gameplay needs not rely on violence or domination. Physicality and visibility of analog games here encourage, obviously, procedural literacy. But let's dive a little bit more in the punk tradition, because punk tradition here offers not only a critique of a dominant cultural form, but also it offers us creative tools for reimagining them. In wargame design, a punk aesthetic emphasizes discomfort through mechanics that challenge expectation and promote critical reflection. This involves, for example, rethinking how game frame agency, success, and ethical complexity. This not only by merely adding graphical content, but by redesigning all the morality system, tactical variables, and all the moral choices that are usually in gameplay. A key strategy is also to use counter-hegemonic historiography for grounding perspectives that are usually excluded from mainstream war games, such as, for example, civilian experiences, long-term consequences, or colonized voices. These approaches challenge dominant military narratives and invite alternative understanding of conflict. And such practices also challenge the military entertainment complex. Mainstream war games like Warhammer 40k that I already mentioned and Book Action present stylized and moral neutral systems. And these games are also widely played and commercially successful, shaping perception of authority and conflict while omitting ethical complexity, fostering what can be called ludic militarism. But by contrast, punk-informed design reveal hidden power structures and center marginalized voices. It seeks to make games into spaces for exploring complexity and not escaping it. Realizing this potential requires, obviously, a cultural shift across gaming communities. The analog format, with its adaptability, its face-to-face interaction, offer a fertile ground, a meaningful ground to change. But this change depends on sustained efforts by both designer, critics, and players alike. To conclude, the deliberate silence that pervades the contemporary analog wargaming, the absence of bodies, civilians, trauma, law, ethics, and consequences are not inevitable features of the medium, nor are they solely the result of commercial pressures. Rather, they are historically specific design choices that reflect and reinforce particular ideological position. These exclusions shape how players perceive the relationship between military force and political authority, influencing broader cultural narratives about the legitimacy of organized violence. By exposing these patterns and experimenting with alternative approaches, we can begin to imagine ludic forms that engage seriously with the ethical and political dimension of warfare. The missing rules, those systematic exclusions that define contemporary wargaming as much as what is actually present, needs not to remain missing forever. Through sustained critical engagement with the medium political dimension and creative experimentation with alternative design approaches, we might yet imagine ludic environments that include, rather than exclude, the full range of human experience in warfare. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
These are the references.
There they are. Great. Thank you, Valerio. And we will move without delay to our final presentation, which is from Marc.
Hello.
There you are. And take it away once you're ready.
Yeah, it's up. It's good. It's working. You can hear me.
Yep, you are live and
Fantastic.
ready to go.
Hi,
The mic
everybody.
is hot.
Lovely. I'm Marc Lajeunesse from Concordia University in Montreal. And this is Creating Revolutionary Magic, Allegorizing Revolution for Subversive and Critical TTRPG Play. Revolutionary Magic is the game, the name of the game that TAG, the Technoculture Art and Games Research Center, is making. It's a TTRPG done with my research center in collaboration with the creative writing program of the English department at Concordia. And what we're going to talk about today, I have a little preamble that follows this pre-preamble. I'm going to talk a little bit about the team making this game and how this even happened. I'll give a brief description of the game, and then I'll talk about 3 punk points that guide our game design in keeping with the theme of this conference. And so my preamble. So I made this presentation and then I remade it and then I remade it again because, oops, I'm talking about a game that is most effective the less you know about it before you play. And so I've structured this in a way to hopefully entice you to join the playtest for this game when we go live to open playtesting. And hopefully there are some useful provocations for the theme of punk and building on the idea of revolution that the panelists have talked about so far without giving the whole thing away. So, much like a film made before 1965, I'm putting the credits at the beginning of this thing because this is the product of a large dedicated team to making this. How did this happen? So I somehow found myself in the very fortunate position of teaching a course on creative writing for video games in the English department. Now, this is a unique course in that it took their slot in the creative writing for media, and they added a subtext to it, which is creative writing for video games. The challenge of this course is that it was mandatory for students, and so it wasn't just people who love games. In fact, I would say that out of that list of 19 students who were in the course, about 4 or 5 had actual interest in video games. And so what we did is I made it an exercise in a writer's room that had kind of broad media applications. So if they wanted to go into any media industry, they would be prepared to write in that environment. But the thing that this also produced is that we had a bunch of people not used to the tropes of games, not used to the way games do things, writing and contributing both to the design and to the narrative form of this game. And early on in the writer's room process, I was like, wow, you guys are really cooking something good here. Why don't we actually make this? And so everyone got on board and was happy to be to take an equal writer's credit on the project. And I was going to turn the treatment that we wrote for a video game and turn it into a TTRPG. So that's how we got to this project. What is this game at a glance? So narratively, the concept of the game as created by me and the students together is as follows. Born just after a revolution, which was triggered by the discovery of magic, a group overthrows an old corrupt oligarchy. You and your classmates attend the world's first academy dedicated to magical studies and practices, which is now put in by the new government that overthrew the old one. So you are part of the beginning of concretizing a former revolutionary movement that has found themselves at the height of power. The gameplay concept is that each chapter session of the game takes place during your end-of-year field exam for the current year of study, where you apply everything your character has learned from the prior school year. That prior school year itself takes place mostly off-screen with some macro play about 15 minutes at the start of each session, leveling up. When you level up, you actually narrativize the things that you have learned from that prior year. And this lets us do some interesting things, which is over only a few sessions, because it's a self-contained, mid-length campaign of about 30 to 40 hours, you get to explore a complete narrative arc that looks at sociocultural processes that take time. If you do the long version of this, you look at about 25 years in this world's history. If you do the short version, you're just looking at about 5 to 6. Each session, players will revisit characters that are going through ideological changes in response to new knowledge, experiences, and events in the world. So you are kind of jumping into the skin of your character in these intervals in their life. The most recent season of Andor kind of does this as well, where you're seeing these snippets a year apart, a year apart, a year apart. That was a coincidence. We wrote this before that season came out. Interesting and fun game mechanic of revisiting what and how you've learned over the past school year. So interrogating the education you have when it comes time to put it into practice is a fundamental mechanic of this, and not seeing what you've learned throughout the school year and having to channel back into it and role play it as kind of a flashback allows us to play with information and knowledge in really interesting ways that lend itself to a revolutionary story, right? So our 3 punk points. What is punk about this game, other than an old-ass punk was leading the class that made it, and there's a bunch of punks in there? Well, it's driven by collective unrest, which, what's more punk than that, right? The initial game treatment, written as a classroom's collective real-time response to socio-political turmoil and malaise. And I apologize for maybe having to remind you of everything or some of the things that have happened since the winter term started, but a cursed presidential inauguration and everything that followed, escalating geopolitical conflicts and growing social apathy. The one of the most critical elements of our game that a couple students really latched onto, which was Luigi Mangione media discourse and more apathy. One of the key NPCs that drove some of the narrative threads that now have become opportunities for player action was the NPC was pitched as Luigi Magione in our Magic School world, and that was his placeholder name for most of the design until recently. Repeated threats of annexation of our country were in Canada, which also included a bunch of young American students who chose to do school in Canada so they could be in a different environment, now faced with the idea that, is this place just going to become like that place I tried to get away from, right? It's a very tough situation for them to be in, but produced really compelling thoughts when writing this into the game design. And of course, tariffs, destabilization. These were graduating, most of them creative writing students, and so they're facing precarity that's getting even worse in Canada as the tariffs have their effect, and then the increasing feeling that no lessons will ever be learned from history for more than a couple minutes. So what does this translate into, really? It translates into this core question at the center of our game, which is, why is it in the face of revolutionary possibilities so many continue on as normal and or outright reject opportunities to mobilize for social change? To get to that question, our game covers a range of layered phenomena that are really critical to understanding revolutionary movements outside of the idealized Star Wars-y version, or really the mass media version of a bunch of plucky rebels just try as hard as they can and eventually the world will change and their sacrifice is definitely worth it. It's a nice idea. It's not really how revolutions work. And so we're looking at ideas of indoctrination, complicity, coerced or otherwise, biopower, suppression, systems of resource acquisition, capitalism, colonialism, and the military-industrial complex, also ecological issues that tie into those. And the player characters encounter these forces at various scales from the point of view of people for whom these are implicit in the world in which they have been raised and educated. Slowly, the players have to come to terms with how these forces interact, and they have to find their own solutions to engage with them, if they can find any at all, because that is the challenge of actually acting in a revolutionary way to achieve some end, right? And so the good/bad news for us is that those concepts, particularly resource acquisition, is so common in the language of game design, both video games and TTRPG, that it's quite easy to use them and add little tricks to them that subvert them. I'm going to talk about one mainly here, which is the way we use knowledge and information. Recall knowledge is a pretty standard TTRPG game action. What do? You roll a die against a check, and this is effectively used for a way, as a way for the DM to provide information about the world to the players. It's kind of a lore needle that you can inject into a game session, right? We're changing this from recall knowledge to remember lesson, which is about learning something in the specific way that you were taught it. Often this kind of action is supplemental for many players, but in Rev Magic, it is tied directly to information that players want, like info about the spells that players can cast. It is also important because it gives them a POV on the game world diegetically, not from the meta view of the dungeon master, but from the courses they have taken in this school that is very much a part of the current government that has an agenda, right? This matters because there are in-game consequences for casting spells irresponsibly and acting without information, much like the prior presentation just talked towards. I also have a problem that there's no accountability for action. And so in this game, if you commit violence, there are repercussions that occur. And so you have to act with information, right? There's also, in the structure of just adventuring, questing, and gaining power in games, there's kind of an implicit colonial structure. I mean, Suvik Mukherjee talks about that. Any game we play, you're always going into a place, not really questioning why we're going on this adventure and taking things out of that place to gain power. It's just colonial in form, baseline, right? And so the Academy has this dual function narratively and institutionally. It's sending you on quests that a player on average is going to take for granted, right? As this is what we're doing. Now, it's not an Ender's Game situation. That story already exists, where it's not like we're going to rug pull the students or the players at the end to be like, oh, you're part of this evil institution. No, you can figure that out right away if you play the prologue or in session 1. That's not what we want to do. The thing we want to do is let's take that as a given. We're part of an institution that is partially to fully corrupt. We don't quite know the full extent of that. The more compelling thing to ask is, okay, so we know we're part of something that's fully or partially bad. How do we actually stop being part of something bad? And what do we do when our ability to meaningfully combat the bad thing grows as a direct byproduct of our participation in the bad thing, right? It's just capitalism. We have to participate to get the resources to put our resources into the thing we want to stop. And so at what point in this game do the player characters and the players playing them feel as though they have enough power, social, economic, force to make revolutionary moves, if ever? And if they don't make any of those moves, why is that the case? And we answer this question throughout the game diegetically as it's played, and then at the end there's a debrief, which I'll talk about more. And then my last punk point here, point 3, which is a bit hyperbolic in the spirit of punk. Ignore what school taught us about educational game design and just effing cook. So I'm really interested in taking a non-didactic approach to educational game design, in the sense that I tend to find, and this isn't true always, and I think in some of the games being designed on this panel, this is not the case, but I tend to find that we overemphasize the mechanic to lesson fidelity, we're trying to directly translate the game or the lesson we want to tell through the precise mechanics of the game, overemphasizing the feeling of play and the larger stakes of the thing. And at times this is a really beneficial design problem, and at times I think it really limits what we do in educational game design. And so here, me and the class is really more concerned with producing a game that people will play and remember over preserving maximum fidelity to the educational ideological goals that drive creation of the game. And much like the students as players in the game casting spells that they know might not work once in a while, I'm happy to launch a fireball that shoots backwards through the gut of the point we're most hoping to make from time to time, much in the spirit of punk bands that in their lyrics very explicitly state their ideological position and yet have tons of fans who show up to shows who believe the exact opposite unironically, right? This is like a perpetual challenge. And in the educational game space, I'm kind of inspired by the idea that, like, well, why are we going to let that dictate the way we approach our game design? I don't think we need to get the message 100% right. What we need to get right is the feel of the experience and make things that are appealing to play, to get into more hands, right? Because that's where the conversations that are going to do the educational work is actually going to happen. It's not in our clever mechanics as much as we want it to be. But it's not a purely shot in the dark exercise of game design here. I've been fortunate enough to have a few conversations with Jaakko Stenros, and last year I finally got to read Nordic LARP in full, and I was really inspired by that book because of this critical play attitude. As these games can portray any world or society imaginable, they are a natural tool for studying questions such as what kind of a world is possible, what the world should or could be like, and what our world is actually like. To me, that is such a good starting point for thinking about how we can do educational game design differently. Let's take the risk. Let's make a world. If the one-to-one metaphor is not working, okay, but maybe there's still something really good to get out of that anyway, right? From Nordic LARP as well, this game really encourages a lot of diegetic action. In Nordic LARP, you basically have to take a break or be in character the entire time. We also use this as a rule. Basically, any question you ask the DM cannot be addressed to the DM themselves. It has to be addressed to a character in the world. And so you're always getting a perspective on things rather than the meta knowledge. Also, any table talk discussions in this game can be interpreted by the DM as an in-game discussion, and they should be. Basically, the only questions you can ask at a metagame level are basic rules clarifications, but anything from the character point of view, any strategization, like we have social encounters in our game, everything you can do in this game has a non-violent option to approach it, but in any social encounter, any strategizing that is being done is overheard by anyone around in the game, right? Which is really important. And Nordic LARP also provides a solution to this last question, which is, okay, if your metaphor doesn't work, what if players completely take away the wrong thing and like read a pro-fascist message in the game? on one end, the artist is dead and we can't help that from happening, a la Punk Band Point explaining their very specific position, and other fans just not getting it, which is like, that's going to happen if you take these kinds of risks and leave the metaphor open to interpretation. But we also bring in the debrief, right? So the GM guide is being designed with suggestions for talking about particular content with references to historical sources that explain and support those suggestions, reference to other revolutionary movements, reference to ideological theories and approaches to revolution. So we can kind of say, this is why we're having it presented this way. Here's ways to kind of talk out what happened in the game, especially if some intense things happened. That's really important. And so some conclusions from this. Because this is a work in progress, I don't have a ton of conclusive things, but I will have some conclusions about the process, which is, if you're in the position to trust students and help them pool their creative resources and ideas together to make cool stuff that hopefully helps them land a job, because it straight up sucks out there right now. And I know for me and for the students involved in this project, this was one of the most fun things we got to do in the last few years. It was especially nice for the students to feel like they're spending their educational energy on a project that is going to see the light of day at a particular level of quality. It's going to look good and may play a factor in them finding their place, right? Like that, this is a really nice way to use class time if you have a class where you're able to do this. I highly encourage you to take the risk if you're in this position. And then trust your design decisions and make your next educational game the thing you really want to make. Design conventions be damned. I think this is already happening based on what I've seen here today, but it's worth restating. I love educational games. I wish more of them were better. And I think we just got to cook, right? Nordic LARP said it was okay, so let's do it. And then you should sign up to play test our game. We're currently doing closed local play testing, but we are recruiting GMs and players for play testing this fall. So you can follow that QR code. I'll put a link to this in the Discord as well, so you can register there. And this will be open through mid to end of fall here. And if you have suggestions for funding opportunities, I really would like to pay my team more. Right now, we're operating on peanuts and love. And I think the quality of what the artists and the writers are putting out here is just so high that I would love to find some more money for these young folks trying to make it. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marc. And if you could take down your slide, we will then move to the discussion here. And again, you can post the advertisement over in Shameless Plugs, the thread, as well as in your own panel thread on Discord. I'm grateful now to bring everyone together for a final discussion of this important topic, and I really appreciate the fact that all of the papers intersect extremely well. I think my initial remarks are, of course, Marc talked about the money for any of this work, and this is a two-sided coin. When you get money for your work, you can't do the same sort of punk things. And one of the issues we're having is that once someone gets sort of established as like the experimental play outfit, there's always a young up and comer who says, you can't tell me what to do. And they're right too. So there is, you will almost immediately become the establishment and the enemy. I remember when Indiecade was founded, and I thought, this is a cool idea. Now Indiecade is considered the villain in many people's stories. What happened there? How did we get there? I'm also thinking about, what I call SEO erasure, in which earlier eco games, earlier socialist games, earlier revolutionary games, earlier feminist games of all kinds have been deleted from your eyeballs. So you have not been able to see them. You have not been able to see your predecessors or play them. And so you're working with whatever you have. And this goes to all four panels, for all four papers, that every single one of your topics has a history, a long game design history, and lots of game designers who've been working with it. And I'm absolutely happy to help trace that genealogy. But one of the issues is, of course, when things are punk, that it is hard to to generate a history that's long lasting without institutional support. And then once you have institutional support, then you become the enemy. That's my opening remarks. Let's turn to the Q&A. I hope I've helped generate a few ideas. For Valerio, this is the first question. Do you think it would be possible or even desirable for war games to incorporate some of the context of war that's currently absent in a way that reflects their real life weight? Or is the fact that war games, as a genre, fundamentally turn war into a fun intellectual exercise that prevents deeper engagement?
Okay, so for lack of time, I didn't actually engage in describing the history of war games. But the problem with that is that basically we are still stuck in the idea that von Clausewitz had of war. Basically, the idea that war is just political action with other means. Since we are stuck there, we are stuck also with the origin of the Kriegspiel and all that was made to develop the Kriegspiel and all the war games nowadays. All the major war games are in a way or another influenced by the idea of metric calculation of everything and statistical probability of everything. There is a structural problem in the genre by itself. At the same time, if we think that games are laboratories for thought, the things that we have to basically, the consequence is that our idea of war, the treatment of war in these war games reflects basically a major failure to imagine alternatives to violence, alternatives to power. Those are fun because there is capitalism involved. At the same time, if we want to change how a war game works, we have to first, in my opinion, acknowledge that war is there for a reason, and this is a political one first and foremost. It's not unavoidable. So, for example, we have to hack games that works. I'm waiting for someone, for example, to hack in a purposefully way Warhammer, both 40K and Age of Sigmar, to actually use the same rule set to do something different. So it's a question of changing how we think about war, to change the war game.
Yeah, thank you. Again, this is sort of an ideology first argument where the issue is the ideological climate in which we produce, and then our work is just an expression of that. I want to explore the psycholudic with Margarete and Thomas before I get to the next questions, where I'm interested in actually the fact that you're coming from a Viennese context, and Vienna has a long-standing investment in the psychological and even the the exploration of the self as a mysterious object. How do we equate our own, explorations of ourselves and our ecology around us? Are these the same quest? Are they different? What is, how do we create the mystery, especially through games?
Yeah. Thomas, or shall I say something? I could
Well,
answer a little bit,
well,
yeah.
I think
Also,
that
maybe one short remark first, then Thomas. We didn't show it in the exhibition, but we also had like a Freud examination bed in the show, where you could also change the perspective by not being what is this? Vertical, oder? Yeah, vertical to the horizontal. And only by playing in this position, you already change your perception. It's really true. Also from the as a neurophysiological approach, you see differently. You even don't anymore know what the vertical is. So this change of perspective is physical. It's not only analog in the game, it's physical in our body. Speculative answer. Please, Thomas, a real answer.
No, I can't give a real answer. Sorry, I just wanted to point out that yeah, I mean, the introspective or the experience of the players and so on is one of our research interests, and we do it with the Stefan, who is a neuroscientist and who does the EEG measurements, and we made something measurements with a card game with 3 players and how the dynamics of 3-player games where alliances change during gameplay and so on are perceived by players. So yeah, it's in our research interest, but we don't have any answers, or at least I don't have any answers yet.
Yeah, and the change of the borders of the self, this is doable. It's not anthropomorphization, but really, I mentioned Jane Bennett before in one of the answers, this vibrant matter, so that the borders become liquid. That's not anthropomorphization, but this border doesn't stop at the skin. And this experience you can make in such a play. I deeply believe it, and we have it in feedbacks of the players right now. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I think from an American context, we always like to think of ourselves as individuals who can buy and vote our way out of situations where we actually, in this particular situation, we have to think of ourselves as part of a collective and dissolve these borders of the self. Yes.
As also with other species. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that there we think of the rhizome and the root system and other models. Wonderful. I'm going to make sure that every presenter gets a question. So Jason Cox posed one to Marc, and he says, I feel like as creatures of institutions, we have to confront our own responsibilities in resisting and disassembling the systems we occupy. A real risk we face is just passing that responsibility on to our students. So how do the teachers then reinforce or confront or hide in any other way so I need to phrase this correctly. How do those teachers reinforce, confront, or hide, or in any other way exist in the setting you have created? There we are.
Yeah, so I mean, since the core setting of this is in a school, there are teachers, right? And so through the session 0 of the game and through what we provide as the pre-made materials, there's a combination of pre-made teachers in the setting and teachers that the players as students in the game brew up, right? And the answer to that question is the ones that we make represent different ideological positions, thinking back to the allegorical shape of the world we've made, which is post-revolution, new concretized power. The teachers would have lived through the old government, the revolutionary moment, and then have been installed in this school that is funded by the government. But over time, we'll have different relationships to that first revolutionary movement and the current state of the political atmosphere, the ideology that they're bringing, right? And so the teachers operating in that environment have a lot of obvious and possibly less obvious points of view on the situation, the way they teach, what classes the students are recalling lessons from, and the way they're getting that particular information from which specific teacher's class. Does this mean this is more true? What is the spin on this perspective that they're then recalling? That's a really important way that this works. And like as any TTRPG, the things that we provide are, stat blocks and flavorful descriptions of things that are meant to be pressed upon by the students. And when you press upon them, you create moments for conflict and action, right? And so the teachers represent a pretty wide array of possible positions that also can be acted upon as the players, as students, uncover things about the world and want to facilitate change. Maybe one of the most climactic moments of one particular campaign is confronting their favorite teacher who has a point of view they do not like and trying to do a social encounter where they convince them that their opinion is bad and that they've been teaching them terrible shit, right? That is a way that this can work. But as a TTRPG, it's always exploratory, right? But don't worry, we've really, in a way that impresses me, taken account of many aspects of the situation, teachers included, especially because both me working inside a school where teachers have a lot of different opinions about how to do things, and the students being at the end of their 4-year undergraduate, having met a bunch of students who teach them in different ways, who have different levels of care about the students that they encounter, that like very personally, the students were writing this stuff in as we were building up the game throughout the term, right? So that's definitely there in quite a few ways.
Yeah, and I just taught a decolonial game design course for my second time, and I noticed that student confidence about, am I a real game designer, right? That imposter syndrome that follows us all is a barrier that we need to overcome almost immediately and say, yes, let's get to the work now. We're going to try and solve these very hard questions through, or at least answer them through game design. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Zoheb, your question is from Alula Hirst, and it is Daybreak is a game that directly addresses real world climate issues and is focused on collaborative exploration of climate issues and solutions. From what I understood, you focused on games set in more fantasy worlds. Is the reason you chose these fantasy settings? Do you see differences then that are in the games that are set in fantastical worlds versus those set in the real world?
So I don't know actually. I don't know about Daybreak, so I'll have to look into that. I'd say the focus on fantastical worlds is largely an outcome of what games tend to be, which is set in fantastical worlds, especially TTRPGs, as opposed to digital games, which I think tend to run the gamut a bit more. So I think like there is a massive shortage, relatively speaking, of games that TTRPGs that are set in the real world. And that I think is really the main reason we have this sort of difference. Now, if I can speculate without actually having looked into Daybreak, and what as an example of what real world eco games, eco-revolutionary games might look like, I'd say like potentially there are certain differences, I'd say, because I, I the thing that fantasy world lets us do in terms of like exploring other kinds of politics is that it lets us kind of like decouple from it kind of like lets us abstract reality in a more acceptable format, I might say, in the sense that when we are dealing with reality, then there's no like upper limit to the complexity of of intersectionality and all these other issues and so on that must be considered. Now, which is not to say that when we are doing a fantasy world, we should be more willing necessarily to kind of like ignore those limits. But I'd say that there is a bit more of a suspension of disbelief that allows you to like focus in a little bit more on what you want to do, which I think kind of goes back, perhaps in a sense, potentially counters the criticism that we were making in the games, in the sense that, of course, all these games have their own particular lens and they're doing what they are doing. So why are we necessarily saying why isn't this game more political, right? Why is Mappa Mundi not more political? So it's more a sense of like I'd say that the exclusion of those lenses, if the game was in the real world, would be even more, I think, like more blatant, I'd say. Like I think like it's even more obvious when those things are missing. And I think as it is now, games like Mahamundi and so on, you kind of have to intentionally be reading them against the grain to kind of like intentional critical reading to kind of like see those flaws. Whereas I think with if you had a real world game that kind of like if Mapamundi was set in the real world and had the same mechanics, I think you'd call foul more early. So maybe that's the difference.
Thank you. And
Mhm.
we've got a couple more minutes. There is Leonardo has a very interesting question, but there's one from Teresa that just came in about wondering about the role of tension between subterfuge and sabotage for exploring the themes all of you are exploring. Much of the punk ethos is seated between loud and noticeable, but in these situations, there's secretive subversions arguably more effective for initiating change, at least initially. From my own perspective, from the indie scene of the 2000s, we had Steal Away Jordan, where you had subversive secret goals you were trying to hide from the game master, or Misspent Youth, where you were rebelling against the authority and selling out your traits in order to resist. So basically, you watch your character become more deeply cynical as they try and resist the authority. So games, I would say, make arguments about what proper strategies are. Most of us are nerds who sit in front of computers all day. I don't know how, like, effective any of our strategies are, and we should not be announcing them on the public and recorded YouTube um, recording here. But at the same time, yes, this is an open question for everybody. How open or secret do these strategies sort of have to be in these games? Anyone can answer. Thomas?
Yeah, if I just may, because this is one idea we had when we made this Catan rule change. We had the idea of making a sticker you could glue into a Catan rule book, which says you have to change the roles produced by a random dice roll and so on. So this would be something that, because lots of people, at least in the German-speaking world, everyone plays Catan, and it would reach a lot of people if you wanted to do this. Because otherwise, I mean, I think yes, as was already talked about, most of the games we're talking about are niches within niches within niches. Not that I say that board game revolution and so on is great, but still, I mean, yeah.
If I may add something, well, how secret you want your project to be? Let's say if I have to consider how many cease and desist letters Games Workshop sent during the last 5 years to people that actually used they're kind of intellectual IP or inspired to their IP to model things that are like there. I think that pretty pretty secretive. If you model something that is explicitly Games Workshop-like, you call it Games Workshop-like, or you model a way of using their miniature in another system, I think that they will be more than prone to shut you down pretty fast, let's say.
Yeah. I was also thinking about this because two of the games that we analyzed, they explicitly called themselves ecological role-playing games, and I think I analyzed them relatively more harshly compared to the game that did not. And this made me think that I think when we announce our intentions, especially as aiming for something lofty like revolution, and this is the revolutionary game and so on, when you announce like a lofty sort of goal like that, then I think people are aware of what you're doing, and they're more defensive, perhaps, if they don't accept that. And if they are accepting it, they're like, but is it the one? Is this the one? You're going to be analyzing it more. There's going to be, you're inviting scrutiny in a way. Whereas I think when you don't have that, then I think there is a potential then of like what you're actually trying to say kind of like seeping in a little bit, because people aren't necessarily looking for it. I mean, at the end of the day, most of these games are games essentially, and of course not necessarily all of these are games made for fun, but if we are playing a game that's for fun that happens to also have subversive messages and so on within them, then I think that is more likely to kind of like seep in versus a game that announces its politics straight up and saying this is what we're saying, and then you have to analyze it on that respect potentially.
And I'm going to have to cut conversation here because we've reached time and want to be respectful for everybody. Please do take any conversation you think is lingering and jump right into the Discord and continue to do that. But otherwise, I would like to thank all of our panelists, all of our contributors who are both here and not, for enriching this day. I'm so happy that you have contributed to here, and of course keep the conversation rolling in Discord. We will now take I believe it is a 30-minute break, and then we'll be back on for our keynote at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, called Thinking of a Master Plan, Hip Hop TTRPGs and the Power of Imaginative Defiance, with Quinn Murphy. So thank you so much, and stay analog.
Thank you so much. Bye.